service. That's good. I want to thank the event partners, Leaders in Energy, the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and Rewiring America for their partnership in tonight's event. And of course, a warm welcome to the speakers who we will introduce to you all shortly. Now, before beginning, I also want to introduce EcoAction's program manager, Ting Weymouth, who will recite our land acknowledgement that EcoAction begins each of our events with. And then Ting's going to give a very brief listing of upcoming events that we all hope that you consider participating in. So Ting?
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited about tonight's program. Let us take a moment to remember that when we gather together to do the work of EcoAction Arlington, we do so upon the sacred traditional lands of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, Massawamik, Susquehannock, Piscataway, and Pamunkey peoples. These people were forcibly removed from their lands to allow for European settlement. As occupiers of their territory, we recognize them as the original and perpetual stewards of this land, and gratefully acknowledge our responsibility for a more honest recounting of our history that empowers us to work for the thriving of the earth and all people.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody. Very briefly, I just want to highlight some upcoming events. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen, and you will tell me if you can't. We have a volunteer leadership training coming up that's virtual over Zoom, again on Monday, February 26th. And on Wednesday, March 13th, we have our 46th annual meeting, which is not just a meeting, but we have exhibitors from other local nonprofits. We have featured speakers talking about the watershed, and it's going to be kind of a celebration as well. Sunday, March 17th, we are screening Forest Her. That's going to be happening at George Mason Auditorium in Arlington. Saturday, April 13th, we have a big public cleanup for Earth Month happening at Jenny Dean Park in Arlington. And Thursday, April 25th, we have our big annual party, the Eco Extravaganza, happening in Falls Church at Clarendon's Beach Shack. And lots of other events always coming up, and you can check out our website, ecoactionarlington.org, or follow us on social media. And I'll hand it back to Jim.
Great, thanks. And while I'm on the subject, let me thank all the EcoAction staff and volunteers who work behind the scenes to make events like tonight happen, and all the events that are coming up. We couldn't do it without them. Now, to begin our program and our featured speakers, now we know we are in a climate crisis and that a full array of solutions must be deployed as soon as possible. Now, the good news is technology advances and innovation are speeding up a whole array of solutions once thought to be way out into the future. And greenhouse gas emissions are much more than just smokestacks and tailpipes. They are embedded in most elements in our lives, especially in our homes and the buildings and how they're built and how they're powered. Therefore, we've got to rapidly deploy new technologies in these areas as we do with those other traditional emission sources. And zero carbon buildings are now becoming a reality within reach. And we have a speaker tonight who's going to tell us about a very exciting project just over the river from us that shows that to be the case. Additionally, in cases where zero carbon isn't completely feasible, there are advanced means and methods evolving every day to significantly reduce emissions. And we need to jump into those boldly. So now I'm delighted to turn the program over to our program leader, moderator, and expert in the field, Kiersten Washle. Kiersten's personal goal is to bring the built environment in harmony with the natural one. She currently works as a portfolio energy and sustainability manager for JLL. Kiersten holds a lead green associate certificate and several other related certifications in this field, and she's a national speaker. She's got a BS in systems engineering and sustainability. She's got an MS in engineering management, and she's got an MBA. She collaborates with building owners, utility companies, third parties to analyze and design both new and retrofitted high-performance buildings. And in 2021, she was named Emerging Change Agent of the Year by Built Environment Plus. So she knows what she's talking about. And I don't want to know what the college loans are. Kiersten will introduce our speakers tonight. She'll moderate the program, and including posing some initial questions to begin the discussion. Now, additionally, we encourage you to submit questions in the chat, and our partner and environmental expert in her own right, Leslie Loudon, will be collecting and offering those up at the end of the initial discussion. So without further ado, Kiersten, welcome, and take us away.
Thank you, Jim, for the warm welcome, and welcome to everyone else that has joined us this evening. Thanks for taking the time. We have such a great program lined up for you. I want to introduce our guest speakers and tell you their full history, but frankly, they're both really incredible and accomplished, and they have a lot of great information to share with you today. So I'm going to keep the intros as brief as possible, but I encourage you to check out their LinkedIn pages, which if they want, they can drop in the chat so you can see more detailed. While I'm introducing them, I would also love if you guys can introduce yourselves in a sense by doing a small informal poll. I'm thinking in the chat, if you can drop on a sliding scale of 1 to 5, a number reflecting how familiar you are with net zero carbon buildings. And we'll have 1 be you've barely heard of them, aside of course from attending this webinar today and reading the title, and 5 being you're a practitioner, you've helped design, you're a building owner, or you occupy a net zero construction building. So I'm going to start introducing our speakers, but I look forward to seeing the results in the chat, and that will also help me tailor some of our moderated discussion later. So first up is Jamal Lewis. He started off strong with a Master's of Public Health from Columbia University and a Bachelor's in Environmental Science from UPenn. He's currently serving as Rewiring America's Director of State and Local Policy for the Mid-Atlantic and South regions. And of course, he wasn't just content to have only an impactful day job. He also has multiple publications around environmental justice, including papers outlining pathways to promoting equity by retrofitting our existing housing stock to be healthy, energy efficient, all electric, and affordable. For all that work, perhaps unsurprisingly, he has received accolades such as the Young, Gifted, and Green 40 Under 40 Award for his leadership in environmental justice. And a fun tidbit from his LinkedIn, he's a board member at DCSEU, which connects us because my first entry into this industry post-grad school was actually through a DCSEU Green Workforce Development Program. A warm welcome, Jamal. Next, we have Daniel McGee. Dan, he's another very educated fellow. He holds an integrated Bachelor and Master's of Architectural Engineering from Penn State and an MBA from Georgetown. He's a licensed professional engineer in DC with a focus on HVAC and refrigeration. And he currently works as a development associate at Redbrick LMD, where he has designed mechanical systems for the Museum of the Bible, the World Bank headquarters, and Virginia Hospital Center. And that's just in our DMV area. Recently, his work has been focused on the development and execution of the Bridge District, a project that we're going to be learning about more today in his presentation. We're so delighted to have you here at this event. And I will hand it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kiersten. Let me share my screen. Presentation. All right. Is everyone seeing it? All right, great. Thank you for the introduction, Kiersten. I'm gonna be speaking a bit about our Bridge District project. It's going to be a bit of a case study of a building we're building to a zero carbon standard. and I'll get into what that means and exactly how we're doing it. But the agenda is basically going to be a who, what, how, and why. Why are we doing this? Hoping in the hopes that we can encourage more zero carbon buildings built around our DMV area. Let's see. So who are we? We're Redbrick LMD, and we're an impact-oriented investor focused on long-term value creation. And we see that we believe that there's a lot of growth around the green line, we're looking to not only build but really invest in these communities that we're building in, and really stay in the communities as we continue to own the properties that we're building. I'm going to be speaking solely about Bridge District today. We have, I think, other people on my team would be more appropriate to speak about St. Elizabeth's East and Navy Yard, but they're fascinating case studies as well. Feel free to go check out St. Elizabeth's East. The new Sycamore and Oak Mass Timber Pavilion is a really cool example of some work that we're doing. But today we're going to talk about the Bridge District. This is a 757 unit multifamily residential building we're building it to a zero carbon standard. It is under construction right now. We're going to top out the structure in May. So I think we're on floor 9 or 10 of 12. And it's right on the landing of the new Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge. And we're building this to a zero carbon standard from a total life cycle approach. And what I mean by that is we're going to fully account for the carbon emissions throughout the project's entire life cycle. Not just the part that we own and operate. But we're taking credit. We are taking responsibility for the carbon emissions that occurs all throughout that life cycle. We take a reduction first approach. So anywhere where we see carbon emissions, we're trying to reduce as much as possible. And then lastly, we're going to offset those emissions. We're going to offset the emissions, the embodied carbon, the amount of emissions that are generated through completion of construction, through a one-time offset, and then offsetting project. And then from then on, all the operational energy will be powered 100% by renewables. This approach generally matches a zero carbon certification offered by ILFI, the International Living Future Institute, which is a main reason why we chose to pursue this exact certification for the Douglass. It will also be achieving LEED Platinum, and it will be like highly energy efficient. So a bit more on the total carbon life cycle for those that aren't familiar with this is that throughout the development process, there are many points of carbon emissions that can occur, all the way from mining raw material out of the earth through transporting those to the site, to building them, to then using it as a building, and then finally when the building's at its end of its useful life, we don't quite know when that's going to be, but 50, 100 years from now, there's some end of life assumptions that happen. Does it get demolished? Do the components get reused? And so there's some emissions generated in that end of life assumption as well. We are tracking this entire timeline. Our general contractor is collecting environmental product declarations for every single product that we put onto the site, that we bring onto the site and head into construction. We're also tracking every single worker that comes onto the site, their transportation emissions, and it's a bit extreme of how much we're tracking in raw data, but we found that while there's some databases out there that have some estimates. We wanted to like further those databases with real prime data, so we can educate ourselves on how much emissions are actually generated during this process, but then feed that back into the databases to make those better. I'm going to first talk about the embodied emissions, and when I say embodied emissions, I'm talking about the emissions generated from cradle, raw materials, all the way through a construction of a finished building. We're tracking a 30% reduction in overall embodied carbon emissions relative to an EC3 baseline, which is one of those baselines that I talked about that has good data, good industry data, but like I mentioned, we're looking to make those a bit better. The big movers here, concrete, steel, your building envelope, and then your interior finishes. And those are kind of the categories that we really honed in on how to in our attempt to reduce these emissions. While we achieved a 30% reduction, this was us throwing almost everything at the wall for a building of this type. So it is a concrete construction. We are in future phases of our bridge district development, we're looking at, trying to replace concrete with either other structural materials like mass timber or carbon capturing concrete. We're going to continuously try to learn from this one and push that reduction even further. But this was kind of us throwing almost everything at the wall, and I think we're kind of at the physical limits of what we can do, given current technology and this construction type, which are two big caveats to that statement. Like I mentioned, we are, once we track all of this embodied carbon, we are going to invest in an offsetting project to offset that amount of carbon. I talked about the concrete. One of the strategies for our embodied carbon reduction was to really optimize every single concrete mix that we put onto this job. In the process of creating cement, that's a very the cement production process is a very carbon intensive process, and so we made moves like replacing the limestone, the limestone that we use in that cement process with a byproduct slag, which is an iron manufacturing byproduct, as well as putting the carbon production or the concrete production right next to our site. We do have the luxury that we have a couple acres right next to our site that we were able to put a batch plant on. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to, one, reduce the transportation emissions that are caused by trucking the concrete. Imagine a building of this size. Imagine how many trucks of the concrete swirling trucks need to come through. But then also it allows us to fine tune the mix exactly to what we want. So if we say like, hey, we need to hit like a certain strength of concrete on this, since we're mixing it right there, that allows the our concrete subcontractor to hit that exact mix. So we don't need to use as much cement as we need to, and reduce our concrete. This project, this is one page of multiple of how many different mixes that we have on site. This was generated, in a partnership with our concrete sub, to just push the envelope as much as we can on trying to reduce our embodied carbon. And this results in, relative to typical concrete, we're emitting 36% less carbon emissions. Here's a bit more detail on continuation on what I was talking about, we're tracking to a 36% reduction in concrete. Steel is another big category. We were able to achieve a high reduction in steel by finding steel plants that use an electric arc furnace rather than fossil fuel burning. And then we are still in the process of buying out a lot of our envelope interiors and the transportation and construction. Once this project is done, I'd love to come and represent the final numbers, or and we will certainly be providing this level of information publicly. So we're looking for we're currently in the process of finding reductions there. Now, once the building's opened, there's an operational component to the emissions that we generate, pretty tied to our energy use. And so one of the a big goal was to reduce the operational energy as much as possible. We were able to achieve a 44% reduction in operational energy, as modeled relative to the DC multifamily median. Based on the benchmark performance standards given to us in DC. Some other key things to note here: this building is fully electric. There's no on-site combustion sources, with the exception of a life safety backup generator, which is a natural gas generator, but no normal operation and combustion sources. Relative to an ASHRAE 90.1 baseline, we're designed to be a 30% reduction to that 90.1 baseline model. I did mention we will be powered by 100% by renewable energy, a combination of on-site and off-site sources. We did load up the roof space on this building with solar panels. I should say we will be loading up the rooftop with solar panels. That accounts about 2 to 3% of the energy use on this building, just because of the density that we're building this at. And so the majority of the energy will be provided through offsite sources. We are currently in negotiations with solar providers on a PPA or similar arrangement. Let's see, and then I think I want to stress that, like, to get these numbers down to these like operational reductions, you don't need to go extreme on every single system type or every single envelope detail that you build. It's really all about like modeling out and finding kind of like the point of diminishing returns on each of these. And so you kind of like study, like, say, like the window U value, you kind of study saying going from single pane to double pane might make a lot of sense and have impact, but then that double pane to triple pane might cost a lot, and it might have, you can see that down there where it's like you start to see diminishing. It will be better energy, but you start to see diminishing returns, where I'd rather spend that money on other energy saving measures. And then the combination, once you kind of find this like nice combination, there's a compounding effect between them. So you don't need to go to the extreme edge of every single one of these. And we were able to get this. We've been kind of tracking, hey, what if we just didn't care about energy use? Just built like a code standard, and we were able to get this to within single-digit % cost increase relative to that like minimum code standard. Granted, I will say that DC code is pretty aggressive. A code minimum building will probably achieve something like LEED Silver, just off the bat. But it's still, it's not that much more expensive than that kind of meeting code building. One of the key ways that we achieved this is by connecting every single thermal load in the building. And so your apartment heating, air conditioning, your domestic hot water, Yeah, what else do I have in here? All the refrigeration equipment. Atlas Brewing will be moving in as an anchor tenant on this in this building. And they're going to be brewing beer on the first floor. That equipment is linked into this thermal loop that we've created, and so it's kind of cool that, like, you know, the heat rejected from the beer making process will go directly into the residents' hot water, say, right? And so by just saving saving all these energy loads, we can move heat where it's not wanted to where it's wanted. And we are looking at potential a sewer heat exchange system on a bit more of a community scale. It's not going to be part of this construction of the project, but once we build out some more of these buildings, we're going to look to create some sort of, you know, thermal loop on a community scale at the Bridge District. And then here's kind of the summary of what of the categories that, you know, of energy use in this building, based on a typical multifamily median building. And really the big thing is we were able to reduce our domestic hot water load, specifically because we're taking heat from other areas and using heat pumps to get that heat into where it's wanted in that heating hot water side. Yeah, like I mentioned, this is a 44% reduction in operational energy relative to a DC multifamily median. Relative to an ASHRAE 90.1 baseline, we're looking at 30% reduction. And then lastly, like the last thing I'd like to kind of talk about is, why are we doing this? It's really like, it's our core belief that we believe responsible development goes hand in hand with long-term value creation. All of the land on the Bridge District is opportunity zone, and part of that there's tax incentives as part of that, but we are required to maintain it, or to own and operate that building for a minimum of 10 years. We're looking even longer than that. But that's really helped us, kind of think through, like, if we're going to be owning these buildings, that far into the future, how do we future-proof this asset in a way that it's not going to be obsolete when we go to eventually sell the building? And we see some of these long-term macro trends happening, some of which are already happening. But, like, for example, we think like residence companies and institutions will require that their built environment matches their values. And it can either be through an explicit or an implicit example, as I've shown there. Carbon taxes are coming in a lot of areas. DC has it in the form of a building performance benchmarking standard. New York City has local law 97. It's happening sooner rather than later. And so and then on the last side, we think that there's going to be some level of institutional investment, or on the debt lending side, we might be able to achieve greater, better, more favorable terms if we have these, like, zero carbon standards that we're building. And so that's kind of the long-term trends that we see, and that's why we're going through all this trouble to build this. It really comes down to, we just believe that responsible development, is tied with long-term value creation.
Thank you so much, Dan. I think that there were a lot of great insights in terms of the design side, occupancy, and owner. So now we're going to transition to Jamal, who's going to talk a little bit more about the policy side for those less forward-thinking owners who perhaps, have to have their hands forced to get this done. So Jamal, take it away.
Thank you. Well done, Daniel. Very interesting that you went to Penn State, because I'd say a good 50% of my family still thinks I went to Penn State too. So, but I've just given up on correcting them. But that was an awesome presentation. It's good to hear all the different projects that you've got going on. So thanks for sharing. And that you're going above and beyond the requirements. Well done. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'm Jamal, I'm with Rewiring America. I'm going to talk, about electrification specifically, and how that fits into this whole ecosystem of climate action. Talk about some of the resources and tools that we produced as an organization, and how local governments, local community groups like you all can get involved. You see my screen? Great. So yeah, electrify everything. Sort of our mantra, but where does that come from? So I was, I guess, attracted to Rewiring America in part because we have an optimistic view of the future and of the world that we want to live in. I'm not saying others don't, but I definitely think this is a strong suit for us. So we were founded on the idea that we can have everything that we want in terms of things that we like the standard of living that we have. We can continue to have that, but we can continue to have that in a way that is friendlier and nicer to our climate and to the earth that we live on. And electrification is really central to that. Excuse me. So yeah, we were founded on the premise that 87% of our country's emissions come from the energy sector. So generating power, using power, distributing power and energy. 87% of our emissions comes from that sector. And 42% of those emissions comes from decisions that consumers make. So you can see from the pictures here, as consumers, for the most part, we have the power to choose how we're heating and cooling our home, how we're heating and cooling the water in our home, what we're using to cook, where we're getting our power from. Increasingly, we're able to choose that also, and how we're drying our clothes. These are all things that we have the power to influence and to change. And almost half of those of the emissions comes from these decisions. So I think it's the idea that addressing climate change for a long time has been this sort of like large, really overwhelming idea. And at least for me, it's been really hard to imagine how like a simple person like me could address the climate crisis. But we can make a significant dent by just addressing what we can control, which is choosing these types of machines. What does that mean in aggregate? So if we are, in total, we did a projection and estimated that in order to meet, in order to have a shot at the 1.5 degrees, which is what came out of the climate accord and what President Biden's climate goal is that we really need to be switching out 1 billion machines, switching out or installing 1 billion machines by 2050, and that really gives us a shot of meeting those climate goals. So we about 6 months ago put out a report called the Pace of Progress, which you can find on our website. And when you think about like 1 billion machines that we have to install or replace by 2050, it's not as salient. It's how do we make that more accessible? And so what we did is projected what the year-over-year progress needs to be in order to get to that number. So in total, these numbers are in thousands. You can look at some of the year-over-year, the year-over-year sort of installation and or replacements that need to happen in order for us to get those in order for us to meet our climate goals. So for heat pumps, which is the efficient electric way of heating and cooling our home, between 2024 and 2026 across the country, we need 5,673 in thousands replacements or installations. So we, as a general mantra, are hoping to make climate action just way more accessible for everyone involved. So the previous numbers were for the country. We also have a resource tab on our website also to help local governments understand what the pace of progress means for them. And so you can see here, I put in Arlington, Virginia, but you can get these same numbers if you went to our website and also click or typed in Arlington, Virginia. Between 2024 and 2026, need about 9,000 heat pump sales, space heating heat pump sales to occur between that time. So with the local pace of progress and the sort of national pace of progress, we have a way of now tracking to see how well we're doing and giving us more attainable and accessible goals to reach towards. So, that's how we were founded and sort of what we're hoping to get to with our work. And effectively within the decade, we're working to make sure that efficient electric machines are the most affordable and the most accessible machines on the market. So if you're looking to buy a new car, the most affordable and the most accessible version of that is an electric vehicle. So if you go to the dealership, we want it to be a no-brainer that you choose these more effective and more efficient machines. So yeah, that's the overarching mission and goal. And there's a lot that's sort of movement that's already happening in order to make that dream a reality. And I'm first going to talk a little bit about the federal incentives available for electrification. Before I dive deeper into that, I'm just giving you all the resources that we have. So this is a local government policy tool that we also have on our website. Most of everything that I have is here. It's going to be on our website. But it walks through different funding sources that local governments can and should consider if you're not already. So here's a chart of the relevant funding sources that local governments and local activists too, advocates should be aware of. So the top two of this chart are federal rebates that will be administered by the State Energy Office, which in Virginia, I'm blanking on the name of the Energy Office in Virginia, but I'll remember by the time of this, or I'll look it up during the Q&A. But the state is going to administer these rebates, and there's rebates specifically for electrification, where low and moderate income households can get up to $14,000 for a qualified upgrade. And there's also efficiency rebates where qualified households can get whole home improvement supported through either a modeled rebate, which is sort of a projected rebate, or a rebate based on measured energy savings. There's two types. There are also tax credits that are available. This next two are federal tax credits that are administered by the IRS and Treasury. And these are both consumer tax credits. So if you yourself are making improvements to your home, check to see if you are eligible for these tax credits. And you can see the eligible technologies listed there. So heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, weatherization, and electrical panels for the 25C tax credit. And then solar, storage, and geothermal for that 25D tax credit. Both of those are consumer-facing federal tax credits. Both of those are not refundable, which means you have to owe taxes in order to claim them, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality. The next line, the next row is tax credits for electric vehicles. And then the bottom two are for the next one, the commercial buildings deduction is for developers and builders, such as Daniel. I don't know how much commercial you do versus residential. It sounds like a lot more commercial. So be curious to see if you're taking advantage of the 179D tax credit. And the 45L tax credit, which is for new residential homes, both single and multifamily. So if you build the home to a certain efficiency standard, you're eligible for different tax incentives based on that. None of these go through the local government, but these are resources that local government should be aware of and should be pointing their constituents to, nonetheless. Because for all of these, the more that, especially with the tax credits, the more of your neighbors that take advantage of this, the more money that's ultimately staying in the community that can be used to build local economic development. We've got a tool on our website, again, consistent theme with our website, that helps you project how much you could get in terms of, and how much your neighbors could get in terms of incentives from the IRA. Now, we are also currently working, so this version of the calculator is largely, like, in a big way, a projection, because a lot of the specific details around the programs haven't been decided yet. But right now we are currently working on, and hopefully finalizing in the next month or so, a calculator for the state of Virginia, where it will show the incentives that are currently available in the state for home improvement. So we're hoping to launch that fairly soon. Direct pay is a tool within the tax credit realm that allows local governments to basically receive a payment for qualified investments in clean energy. So direct pay for a lot of these credits that did exist prior to our IRA, but got reauthorized with the direct pay provision, which then opens up a whole pathway and a door for local governments to take advantage more directly. So what tax credits qualify for direct pay? Good question. Here's a slide that lists those different ones. I know there's a lot of words on the screen, but I'll just make sure that you all have access to this. Yeah. Also a lot of words, but here are some additional incentives and resources that you all generally and your local government should be aware of. So there's funding for building code, both adoption and implementation. There's money for more energy efficiency dollars that go to the states. The top one, the building code, is both for states and local governments. The next one, only for states. Climate pollution reduction is for both states and local governments. And I think the DMV area is eligible. But I'm going to verify that. The environmental and climate justice block grants are for community-based organizations. The greenhouse gas reduction fund is a complicated program where a lot of the details have yet to be decided for that program. But there is a $7 billion pot that is listed here, where local governments and tribal governments can deploy solar. So that's something that you all should be aware of. There's money for ports, money for heavy duty vehicles, and the last one is charging infrastructure. So EV charging, there's a tax credit for that. Also, that is both consumer facing, so regular consumers can take advantage, but also for developers and builders. If you're putting charging stations in new buildings or developing land with charging stations, you can take advantage of that too. Again, I had mentioned this before, but the amount of benefits that come to your community, as you know, from the IRA, in a big way, is dependent on the number of people that know about them and that take advantage of them. So, you know, I actually live in DC. I am a renter, so a lot of the specific things don't apply to me in a clear way. But there are other incentives for or other programs that impact renters. But let's just say, like, I did own my home and I installed a heat pump and I just failed to take advantage of the tax credit. That is an extra $2,000 that is not in my pocket and thus is not being spent in my community. So the more people that take advantage, the more money that stays within your community, which is a positive. So those are the incentives. So, we talked about broader electrification goals and where we need to be. Talked about the carrots that can help us get there. Here are some of the sticks and maybe some additional carrots that can help us get there too. Again, we're going to start with a resource that is on our website. It is dozens of pages long. So those of you who like to read, you're welcome. This is a tool in a local policy menu for local leaders that are interested in advancing local policy. Here are some examples of policies that are in that tool. We talked about building codes, building performance standards. I think Daniel was talking about the standards in DC. You've got the middle one is financing and funding. So passing budgets that include more money for things like electrification and highly efficient upgrades. Electrification plans. So what does it look like for your community to, as a community, work towards electrifying all the homes, vehicles, etc.? What does that look like? How do you map that out and start to bring this vision into reality? So yeah, these are just some examples of what that could look like.
Jamal, I want to jump in and give you your 3-minute warning.
Great. So we've got some case studies also of awesome local governments and community members that are advancing community-led electrification. They cover a wide array, such as new construction, existing buildings, and funding, deploying incentives towards these types of upgrades. And we've got a coalition. So if there are any local government leaders on this call, we encourage you to join our local government coalition. For everyone else, we encourage you to encourage your local government leaders to join this coalition. You can see the website at the bottom. I just want to flag this. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that I mentioned earlier that I didn't go too deep into, it is a $20 billion pot of funding for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Rewiring America partnered with the partners listed here to put forth an application that would work towards making electrification more accessible by deploying financing to bring down the cost of some of the upgrades. So just want to make you all aware of that. And here are some of the additional resources for local leaders. That's all on our website. Yeah, and so for all of you that are less policy inclined and want to take action yourself or learn more, if you're electrification curious still, as if I didn't already convince you or that you weren't already convinced, we've got this website called homes.rewiringamerica.org with a lot of consumer content. It also includes our personal electrification planner that we just launched last week or 2 weeks ago. The days are blending together. At some point in the last month, we released something called the Personal Electrification Planner that helps you map out your own personal electrification journey. So that's there. And then we've got a whole bunch of consumer content on like stoves and induction and a whole bunch of other things. So check that out. Join us. Valeria is our leader, my colleague who works on local government issues. And I encourage you to either reach out to myself or Valeria. This is Mr. Heat Pump. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, I'm glad the theme was to refer folks to your website because holy cow, there are so many great resources on that website. It's dare I say, a one-stop shop almost to dip your toe into electrification, as you said, or to start urging your policymakers to do more in their part. So next up, we're going to move into the moderated discussion section where I get to ask all my own burning questions. Kidding, but I will be asking some questions before we open it up to the audience. So you guys will have your chance too. I've seen some great questions in the chat and Dan's been doing a great job answering some of them. Jamal, I saw some come in for you, so we will get to those. But first, we'll start this with a quick lighthearted opener. So I want to ask the both of you, and Jamal will have you go first, and then Dan just jump off of mute when he's done. If you had to pick a track and field event to represent the distance between where buildings and policy are now, and then a electrified net zero carbon, net zero energy future, which event would it be and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like it would be like a combination of hurdles, of like where at the end you hop on a ski and then you just go downhill and it's really fun. Like I feel like that's where we are.
Yeah, that's a good. I was kind of thinking something similar where it's almost like a short distance hurdle. The problem is like getting the audience to show up first, right? And so it's almost like the industry and a lot of like policymakers they're like rearing to go, right? But it's like the person with like the timing gun hasn't arrived yet. I have sense, every time we've approached, say, like either an architect or a subcontractor, and say like, hey, we want to do this zero carbon thing, they've all been super excited and they're like, oh, finally, we've been waiting for somebody to do this. Here's all of our thoughts on how to do this. So it just kind of like people just need to kind of start showing up to the right people need to start showing up to do it.
I love it. Yeah, I had hurdles for sure because we all know that we are facing hurdles, but I also kind of think a bit of a relay to your point, Dan. There's different, stakeholder groups, and I think we're slowly seeing the professional designer, the policymaker. They all have their part to the puzzle. Maybe not as ordered as a relay race, but we're getting there, and it's definitely not a sprint. It's another key point to make.
I call the downhill skiing part.
Yeah, there you go. I'm not sure that qualifies as track and field, but I'll let you have it. I love it though. Thanks for the answers, guys. So a little bit more seriously, you both made really interesting points about some of the blockades, hurdles, if you will. So I'd like to circle back maybe to that for a moment. And to you, Dan, say, what would you say to someone that thinks it's not possible to build a zero carbon building, specifically with regards to cost as well? Because that's a common concern, right? Is that we can't do this at cost parity. It's going to be so much more. And so it's just not for us. But what would you say to someone who had that attitude?
Yeah, I and we're still under construction. So we're still, figuring this out a little bit, but we took the approach of like, we kind of set it in our minds that it's possible to do it at no cost or more. And it's just like, if you just kind of truly believe that and push everybody to do it, it can happen. There are we did feel some resistance along the way, not by any particular group, but a bit more of like how the industry is set up to operate in its status quo condition. Like for example, like all the AIA contracting structures are set up in a way that like you hire the architect and then they design a shape and then you kind of like then you hire an MEP firm and they jam all these like systems in and then you kind of end up with a result. And you need to really set that. You're like, no, we're not going to do it that way. You need to just really set it set your expectations very early on, and just just keep demanding it. And if it doesn't kind of equal out, just keep at it, and it will come.
Absolutely. I love it. I think we have about 5 more minutes for the section, so I'm having trouble deciding which question to ask next, but I think I'm going to do one that's potentially a bit hopeful. So imagine that it's 2030 and an owner wants to build a new net zero building. What do you think that process would look like? And if there's something that isn't part of the process today that you could change, what would that be? Thinking policy, industry expertise, level of occupant advocacy, any of those things. And Jamal, why don't you take this one first this time?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the process would just be the same. It just would involve different things. So if you want to build a home, perhaps like the permitting and the like that stuff could be simpler and quicker. I think that's a general comment. Like the process to me would look the same. You want to build a property, you decide to build it, you figure out who's going to build it, that person or yourself go out and purchase all the equipment that you need, which all happens to be electric zero emission equipment that gets installed. It gets quality controlled, quality assured, and then you can either live in it if it's yours, or you can sell it if it's not.
I like it. So for those of you on the call looking for things to advocate, maybe a simplified permitting process. Dan, what would you say?
Yeah, I'd say anytime, I'd say what we need to do is break down the kind of the split incentives problem that real estate has, and that the people designing and building aren't necessarily the ones that take accountability of the implications of those decisions, talking like 30-50 years down the line. And anytime that we can start to align those incentives where it's like, no, we want the building owner or developer to make the decisions that are good long-term decisions. That's where I think we'll really move the needle.
Absolutely. So can you clarify, you're talking more maybe about looking holistically at things and kind of doing more of a life cycle cost approach versus that typical bottom line initial, startup costs. Is that understood?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because a lot of the classic merchant build developer now will build some. They're looking at kind of on a 3-year timeline. Design, build, sell. And then it's like out of sight, out of mind at that point. That is not necessarily looking at the full life cycle approach of the decisions that they've made in that relative, in a building life cycle. Like 3 years might seem like a long time, but it's like super short. It's a little tiny blip of the whole overall building's life cycle. But all of the decisions about how the building's used are made in those critical 3 years.
That's great. Okay, so my last one, I'm going to call it a one breath question. So make your answer as much as you can say, but only in one breath, because we are running short on time. So with that in mind, what can someone on this call do to influence the built environment and market infiltration of this type of net zero carbon buildings? Maybe like a resource that's your favorite, although Jamal, maybe just your whole website might be hard to pick one. But I'll let Dan answer this one first, so you can maybe narrow down your favorite, Jamal, and you can take it after him.
Yeah. I'll say start demanding that your built environment matches your values.
I like it. All right, didn't buy you a lot of time, Jamal. What do you got for us?
What the heck? I need more time. No, I mean, policy is helpful, and more specifically, advocating for more incentives to help people go electric or make those choices. So that's helpful, but insufficient. Helpful. And in some cases not necessary, because I think the fact is, if we wanted to go electric now, we could do like as a consumer, we could do that. So I think the biggest action would be to help your neighbors, help your family understand that there are better machines out there, more effective machines, and ones that will help you save money also. I think that would be, oh, that was a cheat answer, but I think that would be the number one. Would just be like,
and the incentives that Jamal was talking about in his presentation are the real deal. Like that, this isn't like a little gift card pat on the back. This is real money that he's talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. As on the, MEP design side, I was doing those life cycle cost analysis, and it is no chump change when you consider ground source heat pumps in a building. Yes, there's maybe an initial additional expense, but that payback period is lightning fast. So we're talking 1 to 2 years once the incentives come back. So the federal government, that IRA really has tried to push in that direction. All right. So I would love to bring in some of the audience questions, preferably ones that you haven't already answered in the chat. So I'm doing a little scrolling over here on my other screen, but we have one from Ting, who says, I help manage and organize volunteers as a part of my job. If you had to choose a single action for groups of volunteers to take on in this area, what would it be? And I'll let you guys kind of jump in if you feel you have an answer, and we'll just ping pong around.
yeah, I typed an answer, which was advocate for additional incentives, because I think there could never be enough carrots to help people. And the IRA and federal government there's a lot of incentives there. But yeah, it won't be enough to get us to where we need to be. So advocating for additional incentives will be helpful.
Yeah, and I kind of going on, especially like on the especially on the volunteer side, it's like educating people that these incentives are out there. So people are aware.
I love it. Yeah, I think one thing we haven't explicitly named this evening is energy burden. We've talked about costs. So energy burden is sort of if you are in a place where your utility bills are taking up a predominant part of your household expenses. And so there are some, hurdles in terms of if you're doing a retrofit in an owned home, you're going to benefit from lower bills with more efficiency, but you have to first have that initial cost. So I think these incentives are great, but then also things like what you're doing, Dan, where you're building better buildings. So then the occupants are taking on a more efficient space. So they're getting that benefit, and then you're doing the right thing as the owner, really. So I think it's kind of chicken and egg. The more this infiltrates the market, the more familiar and affordable it will be, and we'll have that, complete infiltration. So definitely something to think about, and glad we're making progress. All right, let's see, because you snuck that response in there, Jamal. I didn't know you'd already answered that one. It looks like someone has one for Dan. Does the zero carbon certification set any limit on the amount of carbon offsets that can be used? Without any limit, any building could presumably claim to be zero carbon.
Yeah,
which is absolutely true.
Yeah, which is absolutely true. Right. It's like, but it is one that we've, that is a we don't believe that would be a responsible development. But the ILFI standard that we're going for does require significant reductions on both embodied carbon and operational emissions generated before we can look to offset. So it is a strict requirement, and also genuinely what we believe is right too.
Absolutely. To recap part of your own presentation, I think a message that I saw was it kind of is in order important. You need to know what you're tracking, so carbon, and then first you want to do energy efficiency measures, and then you want to do offsets. So that order is really key to make sure that you're not just building any building that could be a complete energy hog, but then buying offsets and saying you're a green building. So
yeah, and I will say we're also looking very diligently at what type of offsetting projects that we're investing in, and we're taking our time to like go visit these, and make sure that they are doing what they're claiming to do, and it is an actual impactful offsetting project.
Excellent. I think maybe we'll take Tenley's question that says, can you talk more about zoning changes that are needed to encourage green building design? I'm on Arlington Planning Committee.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of go back. I think it's anything that can, I'll kind of bucket into anything that can encourage more long-term ownership, is pretty key. And it's a bit of a vague area, but yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, Jamal, do you have anything to add?
I haven't looked at zoning in a while, and so I don't at this point, but I know in that local policy menu, I think there's a section on zoning there.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Just wanted to give you the space.
Thank you.
We also actually have someone here today. Her name is Demetra McBride, and she's the Borough Chief for Arlington's Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. So she oversees the green building incentive policy locally. And I think she has a couple questions for you all. So I invite her to come off of mute and ask those.
Wow, I was trying to fly incognito this evening. Hi. First, I want to thank both of you for really, really great presentations. You know, I can't get enough of this stuff right now, and it's so great to learn about new programs. Jamal, your website is amazing. I'm going to immediately direct our behavioral change and communications person onto that tomorrow. So in leading into my question for you, it's just a wonderful site. Do you do work or do you have a standard type of work that you do with local governments, or?
I wouldn't say there's a standard type of work, no. There's a wide array, so helping local governments think about and like pursue policies that are that have momentum and or that you're interested in, so we can help with that. But also the reason why I say is there's not like a standard is because I think we're evolving, like our offering is evolving, because we are also getting into more of the implementation. So what does it look like for us to help communities across the country develop and implement electrification and energy efficiency programs in at the community level? And so that Stanley, I'll get to your question. That includes working with local governments and thinking about state agent or local agencies that are advancing cool work and that want to be involved, and get, you know, leveraging our resources to get people to understand that there are resources out there and to understand like what these machines actually are and can do. So there's a wide array, and I hope that provides like a glimpse of what that could look like. But if you have specific ideas,
That's great. We'll be reaching out to you because, you know, like most jurisdictions, 96% of our greenhouse gas emissions are generated out of the private sector. So,
yeah,
you know, we need to focus on behavioral change and market transformation. Because, and this is a nice segue into my question for Daniel, I don't know how much your firm may have worked in Virginia. If so, then you know that we don't have any latitude in our own building codes. So our green building incentive program is literally that. It's around 22, 23 years old, and it's based on incentives. So it's a voluntary program. None of the jurisdictions in Virginia have the ability to adopt their own REACH codes. And the state code is, shall we say, not quite current. Let's just put it at that. So while we're working, and we've been working for the past year on an update to our green building incentive program, that we've actually decided to go really bold and propose kind of an upgrade. So zero net energy, it looms large in that. I'm curious why you're deploying or why you utilized LEED in this in the bridge project. Have you considered FIOS? Because we're looking at LEED with the modeling on the energy savings doesn't always match up in the actual operational efficiency of the building. And FIOS is a verified and certified system, as you know. So I'm curious how you feel about those two standards.
Yeah, and I think I am in full alignment with what you just said. I think you know, we did go for LEED certification because it was quite literally written into our zoning requirements to get at least LEED Gold
Okay.
on this project. You know, our primary certification that we're more proud of is going to be that ILFI net zero
Yeah.
carbon certification. I also think Passive House is a great certification.
Yeah.
I wasn't with Redbrick when we decided to not use Passive House. So I couldn't tell you exactly the reasons why we chose not to do it on this project. But we are you know, the future pipeline projects, we are looking at Passive House. And so I think there's a good chance that we will use that standard in the near future.
That's really great to hear. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be greedy, but this is a short follow-up question. So as you know, all across the United States, jurisdictions are really suffering under the office vacancy, you know, kind of phenomena post-COVID. So adaptive reuse is being looked at. And as you look at those buildings, you know, there are a lot of criteria, floor plate in particular, that really go into, okay, is this building really suitable? Or is the lift too high and the, you know, advantage too small to really go at that building? So are you noticing that in your field, there's more talk about how do we design buildings not only to be zero net energy now, but let's look towards the future? And should we also look at the floor plate of these buildings and how we're designing them and maybe position them in a better place for adaptive reuse in the future so that buildings themselves become more adaptable?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Because you know, you look at a floor plate of an office building, and that even just like the base structural grid is a different grid that you would have chosen if you were designing for multifamily, or some other use. And so when you do that conversion, you're going to naturally see some inefficiency on the you know, we'll call it the rentable efficiency on that. And so it makes it, you know, financially a bit harder to justify you know, moving forward with that project. I think there might, like, you know, we're kind of looking at you know, construction types like mass timber in the future that is a bit more of like a Lincoln log model. You know, in theory, you could take the thing apart and reconstruct it in a different way. A bit harder, you know, a bit harder done than said. But yeah, I think there also is probably some, you know, there probably also is some on the policy level, some pieces that can start to tackle that inefficiency problem to encourage more of that adaptive reuse, because that's really the core problem of why we're not seeing it adopted, you know, in like a massive wave right now, just because that it's just a bit too inefficient to move forward.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation and the bridge project, because to be zero net energy and then to hit, you know, really our energy equity, you know, goals all in one, you know, project is really extraordinary. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, and not at all greedy. I do have another question from the audience. So Kevin asked essentially if you've done any work with thermal energy networks, pairing them in with a ground source heat pump system, water source heat pumps in general, which are one of the more efficient and electric systems out there. So is there any was there any consideration for the current project, and then any future considerations for projects you're working on?
Yes, and we are going to, you know, as soon as we start, because this phase one is the first building of what's going to be 2.5 million square feet on that immediate area. Once we get you know, either one or a few more buildings online, we're going to start looking at it, the thermal on a community scale, and so that's when we're going to implement some sort of community district energy, thermal loop, whether it be a ground source heat pump or sewage wastewater energy exchange, yet to be seen. But we feel pretty strongly that'll help us even lower our energy use in the future.
Absolutely. Okay, folks still with us? I'm scanning the chat. It does look like most things have been answered, but if yours is further up and I'm not seeing it, please do feel free to repeat it down at the bottom. But perhaps now is a good time just to offer you, Jamal, and you, Dan, a chance. If you have any kind of closing thoughts, feel free to share those, and then we'll just have one quick look to see if there are any remaining questions in the chat.
I don't know if you want. I'll go first. So you can make a difference, make different choices, convince your folks in your networks to make different choices also. That's hard, but maybe just let them know that there are other better, more effective, more efficient opportunities out there. And it's possible, right? You just heard Daniel talk about how possible it is. In fact, they're thriving doing this type of stuff. So you can make more of a difference than you may think. And so just step into that and go forth and change the world.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that. I think, I said a little bit about this before, but it takes a bit of a mentality that it's, a large shift in the industry is possible, and you just have to believe it first and make it come true, no matter what people tell you. And it might seem daunting, but as you just kind of push through this, you will come up with some results if you just continue to believe that we can get there.
I love it. That's inspiring. It almost feels like we should stop there, but I did see a couple more questions, so that's awesome. Meredith asks, are Virginia legislators need education? So can you speak on how you sort of speak to those lawmakers? And I feel like, Dan, your answer or your closing thought sort of answered that. And I think us being here tonight shows that there is a community around that concept. And I also think there's a bit of another chicken and egg situation, perhaps, where design practitioners might just push on without them. But if you can talk to any interactions that you have, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to legislators and lawmakers all the time. And I'd say there are a few in a nutshell, there are a few different buckets of things that they care about, like their constituents saving money, their constituents making money, and their constituents supporting them for re-election or continuing their position. What we're talking about tonight, electrification, I think provides like a good basis for almost all of those. Because they're more efficient machines, it just takes more energy to do the same type of task. So it would take less energy to heat and cool your home than it would with a fossil fuel furnace and or like a really inefficient electric resistance, right? Heat pumps are just vastly more efficient. And so that has a impact on bills. There's also just a ton of jobs available in this space. And not just from, like, we're talking about like building efficiency. So we're talking about contractors and energy auditors and plumbers and electricians. Like there's a ton of jobs that are available in this space. But not just that, like on the manufacturing side, on the distribution side, like when you electrify, you get to connect to like solar and battery storage. And like, so there's a whole ecosystem of jobs that's available too. And the more constituents that are going into this field, I think the better off we are in order to get the support of lawmakers. And you all just continue to push them also, right? Continue to push them such that they are representing your views and representing your desire to make a difference in the world. And You know, I think that in and of itself can show, like, showing that you care is also a big deal too.
Yeah, and we've had good success. You know, it's unfortunate that a lot of the issues that we're talking about today have gotten highly politicized. You know, in certain areas, things like ESG or you know, social impact or anything is kind of a dirty word in those territories. You know, despite that, we've had good success talking to groups on both sides. If we just kind of go at the long, like the value creation component of everything that we're doing, it's like, it's, you know, much to what Jamal was talking about. It's like, look at this economy, you know, that we're driving here. This is good for everybody. It doesn't really matter what you believe. And so if you kind of take it just like, you know, let's not get into the politicized argument. It's just, here's, you know, here's the benefits, and nobody disagrees with those. So that's we've had good success going that route.
Excellent. Well, I just want to express gratitude once again for you all speaking, giving us a bit of an education tonight, providing links to the free tools, and sharing your time. And I also want to thank all of the participants. I know it's the middle of the week, in the middle of the evening, but the fact that you've come out to learn and participate is definitely invigorating to someone like myself, and I'm sure to Dan and Jamal as well. And there's something to be said in terms of the more connected your community is, the more resilient it's going to be. And resiliency is a big part of sustainability. So you're already doing the work. Encourage additional connections, you know, stay in touch with Rewiring America, follow Dan's company Redbrick on LinkedIn. And of course, the folks that brought you this tonight, I'm going to be handing it back to them for their own remarks. But thank you for having us and putting on this programming.
Thank you, Kiersten. Thank you for all the speakers. Boy, was this rich. It's almost too rich. My head is exploding. But nonetheless, this recording is recorded, and we'll be getting it around. And there's plenty of things to follow up on. And I've also been looking at the chat questions. There's some we didn't get to, you know, many of them just because of time. But there's a lot of good ones that I think we're going to need to kind of get some answers out. There is a lot of public education that needs to be done here, but nonetheless, thank you for all coming out. Get your snow shovels out. It's coming. So good night, everybody.